In the unforgiving dust of the Arizona territory, a woman's life was defined by chalk dust and silence. Her name was Adelaide Monroe, a school teacher shaping young minds in a town suffocated by a powerful man's greed, her own dreams slowly turning to dust. Her world was irrevocably shattered, not by a dust storm, but by a man named Jasper Kane, a wanted outlaw with cold eyes and a reputation forged in gunpowder. He took her from her schoolhouse at gunpoint, a hostage in a desperate gamble. But what happens when a captive becomes a confidant, when a kidnapper becomes a protector, and the line between fear and love is blurred forever by the harsh desert sun? This is the unbelievable story of the lonely teacher and the bandit who stole her and then stole her heart. The year was 1888, and the town of Prosperity Wells, Arizona, was a lie held together by sun-baked adobe and fear. It promised fortune in its name, but delivered only dust and servitude. At the heart of this lie was Adelaide Monroe. She had come from Philadelphia 2 years prior, filled with romantic notions of the West painted by dime novels, a land of brave pioneers and boundless opportunity. The reality was a single dusty street and a one-room schoolhouse that was her entire world. Adelaide was a woman of quiet fortitude, with intelligent eyes and hands perpetually smudged with chalk. She was respected, but not known, a fixture in the town as reliable and overlooked as the water pump in the square. Loneliness was her constant companion. The children were her purpose, but once they scattered home, the silence of her small living quarters would press in, thick and suffocating. Prosperity Wells was the personal fiefdom of a man named Bartholomew Creed. He owned the bank, the general store, the largest ranch, and held the mortgage on nearly every other soul in town. Creed was a man of cold, calculating ambition, with a smile that never reached his eyes, a gesture of ownership rather than warmth. He was the law, the economy, and the shadow that fell over everything. The town sheriff, a gaunt man named Gideon, was little more than Creed's errand boy. Adelaide had felt Creed's oppressive influence firsthand. He funded the school, a fact he mentioned every time he visited, his gaze lingering on her a moment too long. He spoke of civility and progress, while his brutish ranch hands acted as his enforcers. On a blisteringly hot Tuesday in late May, the fragile peace of Adelaide's routine was shattered. School had just been dismissed. She was cleaning the slate boards when she heard it. Not a passing wagon, but a coordinated thunder of hooves, followed by a single sharp gunshot that cracked the air like a whip. Another shot, then panicked shouting. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Instinct screamed at her to hide, but a morbid curiosity propelled her to the window. Peeking through the grimy glass, she saw chaos. Two masked men stood outside Creed's bank, rifles leveled, while a third backed out dragging heavy canvas sacks. A fourth man, tall and broad-shouldered, sat expertly on a powerful bay horse, his pistol drawn, his movements calm amidst the panic. His face was covered by a bandana, but the intensity in his eyes was palpable. He wasn't just a thief, he was a commander. Sheriff Gideon emerged from his office, hand hovering uncertainly over his pistol. The man on the horse simply turned his gaze to the sheriff, a silent, deadly promise that made Gideon freeze in his tracks. The robbers were about to ride, to vanish. For a moment, Adelaide felt a strange relief, but then the leader's eyes, scanning the street, landed on the schoolhouse. On her, their gazes locked for a heartbeat. In that instant, Adelaide felt not like a witness, but a discovery. His plan changed in a split second. He barked an order, his voice a low gravel that carried across the street. "We need insurance. Get the teacher." Adelaide's blood ran cold. She stumbled back as the schoolhouse door burst open. One of the masked men grabbed her arm, dragging her out into the blinding sunlight. "No, please!" she gasped, her feet stumbling in the dust. She was hauled toward the horses, her carefully constructed world collapsing. The leader watched her approach, then pulled down his bandana. His face was younger than she expected, lean and weathered, but it was his eyes that held her captive. A startling clear blue, the color of a winter sky. They held no malice, only a grim, unwavering resolve. "My apologies, ma'am," he said, his voice devoid of any real apology. "You're coming with us." He reached down, and before she could protest, she was lifted onto the saddle in front of him. his arm hard as oak, pinning her against him. "Ride!" he commanded. The world dissolved into a blur of motion and terror. Adelaide Monroe, the lonely teacher of Prosperity Wells, was now the hostage of the most wanted man in the territory, Jasper Kane. Her life of quiet solitude was over, replaced by a terrifying uncertainty at the hands of a bandit with winter in his eyes. The flight from Prosperity Wells was a brutal education in fear. Adelaide was held fast against Jasper Kane, the wind tearing the pins from her hair. The initial shock gave way to a cold dread. Every dime novel she had ever read paraded its horrors through her mind. She squeezed her eyes shut, expecting cruelty, a fate worse than death. But it never came. Jasper Kane said nothing. His arm around her was firm, but not crushing. He rode with a preternatural focus, his gaze constantly scanning the rocky landscape. They left the plains and climbed into the jagged hills, a maze of canyons that could swallow a posse whole. Hours bled into one another. Her throat was a desert. Just as she felt she might faint, Jasper reined his horse to a halt. "Finn, water," he said, his voice low. One of the other riders, an older man with a grizzled beard, brought a canteen. Jasper took it, but instead of drinking, he uncapped it and held it to Adelaide's lips. She flinched. "Drink," Jasper said. It was not a request. "You'll be no good to me dead." Hesitantly, she drank. The water was lukewarm, but it felt like life itself. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, they made camp in a hidden box canyon. Adelaide was stiff and sore as Jasper lifted her down. She stood there, awkward and terrified, a tame bird dropped into a cage of wolves. The men moved with quiet efficiency, unsaddling horses, starting a small, smokeless fire. She learned their names through their low conversation. Finn, the older quiet one, and two younger, restless brothers, Pete and Sam. Jasper approached her. "You'll be cold tonight." He shrugged off his own worn duster and held it out to her. "Why are you doing this?" she finally whispered. He seemed to consider the question. "Doing what, ma'am?" "Being kind. You haven't hurt me. You gave me water." A flicker of something, perhaps weariness, crossed his features. "I'm a bank robber, Miss Monroe, not a monster. There's a difference." He draped the duster over her shoulders. It was huge, heavy with the scent of him and the trail, but incredibly warm. "We needed a hostage to ensure Creed's posse didn't get trigger-happy. That's all you are. A piece on the board." His words should have been chilling, yet they were honest. Terribly, brutally honest. It was a currency she understood far better than the false smiles of Bartholomew Creed. When the food was ready, Finn handed her a tin plate. She ate ravenously, huddled in Jasper's coat. A single sharp look from Jasper was enough to make Pete and Sam turn their curious stares away. He had established an unspoken boundary. She was his responsibility. Later, as the stars blazed to life, Jasper laid out a bedroll for her near the fire. "Get some sleep." "Where will you sleep?" she asked. He gestured to his saddle a few yards away. "I'll be right there. I don't sleep much." He paused, his blue eyes catching the firelight. "No one will bother you. You have my word." His word, the word of a bandit. Yet strangely she believed him. She lay down, pulling the rough blanket to her chin. She watched him take the first watch, rifle across his lap, his gaze fixed on the darkness. He was a silhouette of vigilance, a guardian in the most unlikely of forms. He had fed her, given her water, and cloaked her in his own warmth. This was not the behavior of the villains in her books. This was something far more complex and infinitely more dangerous to her heart. Days turned into a week. A strange, almost domestic rhythm took hold. Jasper assigned her small tasks, mending a shirt, helping Finn grind coffee beans, giving her purpose to combat the despair. She learned to read the men. The brothers, Pete and Sam, were young and reckless. Finn was the anchor, his loyalty to Jasper absolute. And then there was Jasper, an enigma, a ruthless outlaw who gently tended to a lame horse, a man who stared into the fire at night with a deep, sorrowful emptiness in his eyes. He asked about the books she read, about Philadelphia, about why a woman like her would come to the dust of Arizona. "I wanted to make a difference," she admitted one evening. I believed in the promise of the West. Jasper let out a short, humorless laugh. Honesty is a rare commodity out here, Miss Monroe. Usually the first thing a man like Creed discards. The name hung between them. Is that why you robbed his bank? Because of Bartholomew Creed? Jasper's posture stiffened. For a long moment, he was silent. Creed didn't just build an empire, he finally said, his voice tight with a buried rage. He built it on the graves of other people's dreams. He built it on my family's land. He told her the story then, in pieces over the next few days. The Canes had owned a prosperous ranch for 2 generations. When the railroad came through, Creed saw his opportunity. He tried to buy the ranch for a pittance. When Jasper's father refused, Creed used his influence. He bribed officials, forged documents, and had the sheriff evict the family as squatters. My father fought back, Jasper said, his gaze distant. He tried to use the law, but Creed owned the law. One night, a fire started in our barn. My father went in to save the horses. He never came out. He paused, swallowing hard. They called it an accident. Everyone knew better. His mother died of a broken heart. Jasper, then just 17, was left with nothing but a burning thirst for vengeance. The money from the bank wasn't just riches, it was his inheritance. I'm taking back what he stole, Jasper finished, his voice raw, piece by piece. As she listened, the image of the cold-blooded outlaw dissolved, replaced by that of a wronged son. His crime was not born of greed, but of a desperate, twisted sense of justice. One afternoon, a dust storm blew in, a terrifying wall of brown that turned day to twilight. Jasper pulled Adelaide toward a shallow cave, covering the entrance with a tarp. They were plunged into near darkness, huddled together, their shoulders touching. In that enclosed space, the last of her fear of him finally evaporated. An instinct she couldn't explain made her reach out, her hand finding his. He stiffened for a moment, then his hand slowly closed around hers. They sat in silence, connected by that simple touch as the storm raged. It was a profound moment of intimacy, more powerful than any kiss. She wasn't his hostage anymore. She was a woman sitting beside a man sharing his shelter, his story, and his pain. And she, in turn, was offering him something he hadn't felt in a long time, the quiet comfort of another human being. The line hadn't just blurred, it had been redrawn completely. She was no longer on the side of the law, she was on the side of Jasper Kane. The day after the dust storm, the fragile peace was shattered. Finn rode back into camp at a gallop, his face grim. "Posse," he announced. "4 riders. They've got a native tracker. They found our trail." The camp exploded into controlled action. Jasper grabbed his rifle, his face a mask of cold concentration. "How far?" "An hour, maybe less." Jasper turned to Adelaide, the intimacy of the cave gone. "Miss Monroe, go back to the cave. Stay there no matter what you hear." She nodded, but a horrifying thought struck her. Creed was leading the posse. This wasn't an arrest, it was an execution. "They're not trying to arrest you, are they?" she said, her voice trembling. "They're here to kill you." Jasper's gaze met hers. He didn't deny it. "That's been Creed's plan from the start. Go now." He and his men took up positions among the rocks. Adelaide retreated to the cave, but she couldn't stay hidden. Peeking around the edge, she watched. His fate was now her own. The posse appeared an hour later. Adelaide recognized Sheriff Gideon's lanky frame, and at the lead, the imposing figure of Bartholomew Creed. "Kane!" Creed's voice boomed. "I know you're in there. Throw down your weapons and send out the woman. You might just live to see a hangman's rope." Jasper's reply was a single rifle shot that kicked up dust a foot from Creed's horse. The battle began. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the rocks. Adelaide pressed herself flat, her body shaking. Jasper and his men were outnumbered, but they had the superior position. Then a cry of pain. Sam, the younger brother, stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. Pete scrambled to his side. In that moment of distraction, one of Creed's men broke from cover, sprinting toward a flanking position that would give him a clear shot at Jasper. No one else saw him. Without thinking, Adelaide acted. Her gaze fell on a heavy iron skillet by the campfire. She grabbed it, burst from the cave, and screamed, "Jasper!" He turned, his eyes widening in shock. At the same instant, she swung the skillet with all her might, not at the man, but at a pile of loose rocks on the cliffside just above him. The skillet struck with a deafening clang. The unstable pile gave way, cascading down in a miniature landslide. The rider cried out as he was buried waist-deep, his rifle clattering uselessly away. The diversion was all Jasper needed. He swiveled and fired, a single shot that struck the man's leg, neutralizing the threat. The tide had turned. Creed's resolve crumbled. "Fall back!" he roared in frustration. He and Gideon fired one last volley before retreating. Silence descended. Jasper rushed to her side, his eyes blazing. "What in God's name were you thinking? You could have been killed." "You would have been killed," she retorted, her voice shaking but firm. His anger faded, replaced by profound, stunned gratitude. He had seen her not as a hostage, but as an ally. She had risked her life for his. He pulled her into a rough, desperate embrace. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling the scent of gunpowder and dust. In the crucible of gunfire, the last pretense was burned away. She loved him. It was a terrifying, reckless, and undeniable truth. And as he held her, his heart hammering against her ear, she knew that Jasper Kane, the outlaw, felt it too. In the aftermath, a new reality settled in. Adelaide cleaned and bandaged Sam's wound, earning a new respect from the men. She was no longer the teacher, she was one of them. The bond between her and Jasper deepened into something palpable, unspoken. But their survival was far from certain. "Creed will be back," Jasper said grimly a few nights later. "He'll bring a dozen men. He can't afford to let me live." "We can't keep running," Finn added. The territory was getting smaller by the day. "Then we can't run," Adelaide said, her voice clear and steady. "We have to stop him. Not just for us, for the whole town." Jasper frowned. "Stop a man like Creed? He owns everyone." "He owns them through fear and debt," she countered. "But his greatest weakness is his greed. A man that meticulous about his power would keep records. A ledger." A spark of understanding lit Jasper's eyes. "His ledger." "Exactly," she continued. "Your father tried to fight him with the law and failed because Creed controlled the documents. What if we found the real documents? Proof that he's been cheating everyone." It was an audacious, suicidal plan. Go back to Prosperity Wells, the heart of their enemy's power, and steal the one thing that could destroy him. Pete and Sam thought it was madness, but Finn nodded slowly. "The teacher's right, Jasper. A fight you can't win by running, you have to win by changing the rules." The decision was made. They would use the upcoming Founders' Day celebration, sponsored by Creed himself. The whole town would be at the picnic grounds. Creed's office, at the back of his bank, would be empty. "You came into my life like a storm, Adelaide," Jasper confessed one night, using her first name for the first time. "I took you to save my own skin, but now you're the reason I want to have a life worth saving." "I was living in black and white before I met you, Jasper," she replied, a small smile on her lips. "You brought the color and the chaos." On the night of Founders' Day, they slipped into town like shadows. The sounds of music and laughter drifted from the picnic grounds, a cheerful soundtrack to their mission. Pete, a surprisingly skilled lockpick, worked on the back door of Creed's office. A soft click, and they were in. The office reeked of cigar smoke and money. While Pete stood guard, Jasper and Adelaide began their frantic search. Drawers, cabinets, nothing. Only legal-looking documents. Desperation set in. "It has to be here," Adelaide whispered, running her hands along the books on a shelf. "He's too arrogant not to want a record of his conquests." Jasper's gaze fell on a large, ornate portrait of Creed above the fireplace. "He loves himself more than he loves his money," he murmured. He pushed against the side of the portrait. A faint grinding sound, and the painting swung outward, revealing a hidden wall safe. Their triumph was short-lived. The safe had a modern combination dial. "It's over," Pete hissed from the doorway. "We have to go." Adelaide's mind raced. What numbers would be important to Creed? Her eyes landed on a small frame photograph on his desk, the only personal item in the room. It showed a younger Creed in front of his first bank in a Colorado mining town. A small brass plaque was engraved. "First Capital Bank, Esther, 1876. Jasper, the date on that photograph, she breathed. Try those numbers. He knelt, his hands carefully turning the dial. Right to 1-8, left past it to 7, right to 6. He held his breath and turned the handle. With a heavy thud, the safe unlocked. Inside, nestled among stacks of cash, was a thick, leather-bound ledger. Jasper grabbed it. They had done it. But as they turned to leave, the office door swung open. Sheriff Gideon stood there, holding a lit lantern, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him, two of Creed's burliest ranch hands leveled their shotguns. They were trapped. "It's over, Kane," Gideon said, his voice thin. "Drop the book." Jasper stood protectively in front of Adelaide, the ledger clutched in his hand. "You really want to die for him, Gideon?" Jasper's voice was a low growl. "For a man who sees you as a dog on a leash?" Gideon flinched. Before he could respond, Bartholomew Creed's booming voice echoed from the bank's main floor. "Gideon, what's the delay? Shoot them!" Creed appeared, his face purple with rage, his eyes fixed on the ledger. He drew a small silver-plated derringer. "Give me that book." He lunged not at Jasper but at Adelaide. It was a fatal miscalculation. Jasper shoved her safely behind him and threw the heavy ledger with all his might. The book spun through the air, catching Creed square in the face. He staggered back, his derringer firing uselessly into the ceiling. In the same motion, Jasper drew his pistol. Pete tackled the nearest ranch hand. The office erupted into chaos. A shotgun blast tore a chunk out of Creed's desk. Jasper didn't shoot to kill. A single shot struck the shotgun from the second man's hands. Seeing his muscle disarmed and Creed dazed, Sheriff Gideon made his choice. He turned and fled. Creed, clutching his bleeding nose, scrambled for the fallen ledger, but Adelaide was faster. She scooped it up. "It's over, Creed," Jasper said, his pistol now aimed steadily at the man's chest. The commotion drew the townspeople from the celebration. A local blacksmith, a man who had lost his first shop to Creed's loans, was the first to step forward. "What's going on in there?" This was their chance. Jasper grabbed Creed, dragging him out onto the bank steps in full view of the assembled townsfolk. "People of Prosperity Wells!" Adelaide's voice rang out. She held the ledger high. "For years you have lived in fear of this man. You thought your failure was your own. It wasn't. It was him. And this book is the proof." She opened it, her finger tracing a line. "Page 52, the Abernathy Farm. He diverted their water and then foreclosed. Page 71, Howard. The interest on your loan was tripled. He wrote here to make an example. He stole from every single one of you." A low, angry murmur rippled through the crowd. "It's my father's name on page 1. Jasper's voice was quiet, but it carried in the sudden hush. "William Kane. It details the forged deed and the payment made to start a fire. He murdered my father." The dam of fear that had held the town captive finally broke. The crowd surged forward, their anger a living thing. Creed, seeing the hatred in their eyes, finally knew true terror. The fury of the crowd was a terrifying force. They surged toward the bank steps, ready to tear Creed apart. It was Jasper who stopped them. "No!" he shouted, firing a single shot into the sky. "He will not be torn apart by a mob. We are not him. He will face the law, a real law." His words, coming from a wanted man, had a powerful impact. He was offering them justice, not vengeance. Adelaide stood by his side. The people in the crowd looked at her and Jasper, not as a criminal and his hostage, but as saviors. The townsfolk took control, locking Creed in his own bank vault to await the arrival of the territorial marshals. As the sun rose, Prosperity Wells felt like a different town. The oppressive shadow was lifted. Adelaide and Jasper stood on a ridge, looking down on the town they had liberated. "They're calling you a hero," Adelaide said softly. Jasper shook his head, a wry smile on his lips. "I'm still a wanted man, Adelaide. I robbed that bank. This town might see me as a hero today, but the law will see a noose." The truth of his words settled between them. He could never go back. "Then what will you do?" she asked, her heart aching. He turned to her, taking her hands. "Finn and the boys are heading to Mexico. I'm going west. California, maybe. Oregon. A place where the name Jasper Kane doesn't mean anything. A place to start over. The unspoken question hung in the air. She thought of her schoolhouse, the chalk dust, the lonely evenings. It had been her sanctuary, but also her cage. Jasper had kidnapped her, but in doing so, he had shown her what it meant to truly live, to fight, to love with a fierce abandon. "You'll need a teacher," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. "Even in Oregon, people need to know how to read and write." A slow, brilliant smile spread across Jasper's face. He pulled her to him, and this time there was no gunfire, no fear. It was a kiss born of shared victory and the promise of a new dawn. It tasted of dust and freedom. They didn't ride back into town. Their story in Prosperity Wells was over. Hand in hand, they walked to their horses. He helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. It was the same way they had left town, but this time she was not a hostage. She was a partner. As they rode west toward the setting sun, Adelaide Monroe leaned back against Jasper Kane. She was leaving everything she knew for a life of uncertainty with a man the world called an outlaw. But she knew with a certainty that filled her entire being that she had never been more free or more truly home. The story of Adelaide Monroe and Jasper Kane is a powerful reminder that heroes are not always the ones who wear a star, and love can blossom in the most barren of landscapes. Theirs was a journey that began in violence and fear, but transformed into a partnership forged in courage and a shared fight for justice. They proved that sometimes the greatest acts of bravery happen not in a shootout, but in the quiet, resolute choice to trust, to protect, and to love against all odds. If their incredible story moved you, please show your support and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a timeless tale of the American West. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories of history's forgotten heroes. What part of their journey surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.